Good evening and a very warm welcome to the Black Hole. Today we are going to discuss the impact of finance from its controversial reputation to its significant contributions to society, and we'll see whether finance is a tool for exploitation or a catalyst for progress. And we are very grateful to Dr. Jamshed Uppal. मेरे दाएं जानिब आप तशरीफ़ फरमा है. He's a distinguished professor of research at the Catholic University of America. कुछ दिनों के लिए आप पाकिस्तान आए हैं और हमें खुशी है कि आपने हमें ज्वाइन किया है. मोर ओवर वी आर आल्सो ग्रेटफुल टू अब्बास मूसफ़ी जो मेरे बाएं जानिब तशरीफ़ फरमा है. आप आज के सेशन की मेज़बानी और निज़ामत के फ़राइज़ निभाएंगे. मैं आपका मुख्तसर सा तारुफ़ कराता चलूँ. आप फैकल्टी मेंबर एंड रिसर्च फेलो हैं एट पाइट, दैट इज़ पाकिस्तान इंस्टीट्यूट ऑफ डेवलपमेंट इकनॉमिक्स. मोर ओवर you are managing editor of Discourse, which is one of Pakistan's leading magazines in public policy and political economy. You are also engaged with grassroots progressive groups across Pakistan. आप सब लोगों की आमद का शुक्रिया. प्लीज़ डू अस अ फेवर एंड टर्न योर सेल फोन्स टू साइलेंट मोड सो दैट देर इज़ नो डिस्ट्रैक्शन. जमशेद साहब पहले प्रेजेंटेशन देंगे, उसके बाद हाउस जो है वो आप लोगों के तबसरों और सवाल जो आपके लिए ओपन हो जाएगा. आप उसमें ज़रूर शरीक होइएगा. जस्ट रेज योर हैंड फर्स्ट ताकि आपको ये माइक्रोफोन दे दिया जाए और आपकी आवाज़ जो है वो ऑनलाइन ऑडियंस तक भी जाए. बस यही थी 2-3 बातें. नाउ प्लीज़ वेलकम डॉक्टर जमशेद उप्पल एंड अब्बास मूसवी. थैंक यू.
Thanks for coming, everyone. First of all, I tried to translate this word finance into Urdu, but I didn't find any good word for that. If anyone knows any good word to say what I mean, please let me know. But Maliyati Nizam is much broader term and is more directed towards public finance, towards public financial decisions and services and so forth. But what I wanted to talk about is more fundamental. The way finance starts from the pansari की दुकान जहाँ आपको उधार मिल सकता है, then it goes all the way from investors to banks, from financial markets and institutions and so forth. So I'm talking starting at the very basic level. I hope you will like my English title as well as the Urdu title. Finance एक शैतानी चरखा या के कामयाबी की कुंजी. So how many people are on the right side and how many people are on the left side? My impulse or motivation is to educate and leave you with thoughts, and you may be able to decide which side you want to be on. So let's start. How many people do you recognize in this slide? There are only 4 pictures. At least one should be recognizable. So this guy, Shylock, he's from Shakespeare's Merchant of Venice. He is out for a pound of flesh. A pound of flesh because the borrower was not able to pay back the loan. This is the sort of cultural bias, and literature is full of these stories where the lenders are depicted as sharks, as bloodsuckers, vampires going for a pound of flesh. And who is this guy? He may not be known. This is Charles Ponzi, and everybody talks of the Ponzi scheme, as you may have heard. From petty fraudsters to Bernie Madoff, all deploy some variation of this Ponzi scheme. So a very infamous guy. These 2 pictures you may recognize. This one, anybody? Did I hear Ishaq Dar? You are almost there. This is actually Double Shaw, the famous scammer who was cheating the people by promising to double the money in 3 or so months. And this person you may know. This is more recent. Mr. Araf Naqvi, who was involved in several international scandals. So anyway, if I really wanted to have a full hall of shame, a financial hall of shame, it will be stretched from here to Karachi or even further. There will be a long list of people who we can put in this hall of shame. So where is this anti-finance sentiment coming from? Why do we have such a bad reputation for finance? And there are reasons for that, and good ones. But I would like you to have a balanced view so we can look at the other side as well. Okay, so in many religions, there are strong religious injunctions against usury or interest. The picture depicts Jesus, peace be upon him, driving out the moneylenders from the temple. The first quote is from Bible, "You may charge a foreigner interest, but not a fellow Israelite." So Jews were allowed to charge interest to others, but not to their own people. There are other strong passages in the Old Testament, and severe penalties are prescribed. And of course, riba is strictly forbidden and condemned in the Holy Quran as well as in several hadiths. And in Hinduism as well, the usury is prohibited. So you have a strong background as to finance is not liked, why people are suspicious of this whole field.
Okay, basically seeing Banuk is the plural of banks. Banuk is the plural of banks. And Alama Sahib is saying that this is creation of the crafty Jews. This whole industry is the creation of healthy. Noor ha kasina Adam Rabud. It is like that the light of truth, the God's light has gone out of the Adam's of the breast of men, and ta taho bala na kardad nizam. Unless we destroy the whole system, we will neither have danish, nor we will have tazib, nor we will have deen. So this is one example, but there are so many examples where our cultural heritage is stacked against this whole industry. And I can appreciate that because this was a time where, Allama Iqbal actually fought against the usurers, the Baniya classes in Punjab, and he and Sir Chotu Ram, passed a legislation in protection of the peasants, which will fall into indebtedness in protection of those. So this is all informed by their historical experiences. Now, moving forward, today somebody reminded me that today is the birthday of great thinker Karl Marx. So we are being attacked not only by the right side, but from the left side as well. And you can see that Marx thought that this is all fictitious capital, and this was meant to suck bloods, and it made this blood sucking more efficient, and expropriation of the surplus value more expedited the whole thing. Lenin actually thought that this all going to play as it's going to lead to oligopoly between the industrialist and the financial banks. So this is thoroughly condemned. So this is one side. The other side is that now many of you would recall this year, 1757. Anybody? What happened? 1757. This is the famous Battle of Plassey, where the tables were turned, and basically East India Company took over Bengal and the administration of Bengal. So what we hear, our typical story is this: why did that happen? वो कितने लोग थे? गब्बर सिंह का डायलॉग है. वो कितने लोग थे? 750 Goras. Okay, and मुगलों की कितनी फौज थी? About 50,000 फौज. So what we are told that this was due to the treachery of Mir Jafar and so forth, and so many other things. That's all may be true. That may all be true. But one factor which is not really emphasized is that the East India Company won because of their financial might. See, they could hire a whole platoon, later known as the Lal Paltan, of the locals, and they could incentivize them to work for them rather than anybody else. So money played a big role in this whole episode. So that's full of detail, very interesting, but let's move on. So why did this happen? Why did the East India Company got such a financial strength? Why was it this so strong that they could have their own navy, they could have their own army? It was a private company, as they say, it was a small office on the Leyden Street. But how could they become so strong? And then, if you believe me, something happened 150 years ago. This is 1600. And on the last day of 1600, we see that a corporation is born. So a corporation was an invention. It was a very significant economic and financial invention. And what was going on was this, that in those days ships will sail and they will take maybe 4 or 5 years to make a trip back and forth. And that was pretty risky. And most of the ships never, many of the ships never came back. So total loss. So how do we get over this loss? The first thing, the one solution was that pool up your capital, become a separate entity. So a corporation was a separate entity in its own right. It could borrow money in its own name. It could lend money in its own name. It could do all that stuff an individual could do. Plus, a twin invention was the creation of the stock exchange, or an exchange where people could buy and sell shares. So today you became a member of the East India Company. Next month you wanted to get out, and you could easily trade your stock over there. So basically the individual risk was mitigated, was contained, and as a result they were able to raise a lot of money to fund their expeditions and ships. So 31st December, after 31st December 1600, and almost after 1500 years, Britishers or the East India Company became so strong that they could, basically take over the whole country in so many steps. The interesting thing is that the British East India Company not only defeated the Mughals, but they also beaten the French, the Spanish, the Portuguese, and so on and so forth. And why was that? There were many reasons, but one of the major reasons was that they could raise resources very effectively, very efficiently, and with those resources they could build new ships, they could even do some research, and so on and so forth. So the other secret ingredient with the British was the private enterprise, and that was the difference between French way of raising money and the British way of raising money. So that made a lot of difference. So this just shows the power of finance. I was just put this up because I wanted to make a point here that finance is very powerful. So in old days there was a maxim. It was a Roman saying that money, the sinews of war, the muscle power is brought in by the money, and this was very true all through the Middle Ages, where princes were fighting against other princes, small kingdoms were fighting against all, and it was all done through mercenaries, and whoever could get the mercenaries on their side was the winner on the day of the battle. Similarly, in India, same things or similar things happened where you could you could create a whole army. So these are old days. So today this maxim has been transformed into a similar maxim or similar adage which says finance the lifeblood of business. It's not only the lifeblood of business, it's the lifeblood of anything you want to do. You want to build a hospital, you would need resources. You want to build a research laboratory, you need resources. You need to, you want to create a cricket team, you would need resources and so on and so forth. So it's not only the businesses as we know, but all activities require finances to be marshaled and to be directed. In addition to that, the incentive systems have to be in place. People have to be incentivized. So how did this all happen? So it all happens with a simple borrowing situation. One person borrows today, gets a $900 in December, at the end of the year, pays 900 plus 100 in interest. So, this was a straightforward borrowing situation. And the church didn't like it. They prohibited this, and I've shown you some quote of that. So people wanted to circumvent this. And so circumvent this, the simple thing was to pretend that you are not borrowing, you are selling a piece of paper. So rather than borrowing, you say, I'm selling a promissory note, and the promissory note is over there, just like an IOU. I owe you this much money at the end of the year. And the face value of that IOU is $1,000. The lender will say, okay, I'll pay you $900. I'll buy this paper for you for $900. So there's an interest element implicit in this transaction. So that was one way of circumventing the biblical injunction. And then later on, more creative variations were done. And we still see some of our friends are still doing this kind of a jugglery. Sometimes they will have three parties. Commenda, that's one form. But anyway, this is the beginning of finance, where you have a piece of paper being sold and that represents a value down the road. So now the interesting thing happens. This guy, the lender, is now sitting on this IOU, holding the IOU, and after 1 month, 6 months, whatever time, is in need of money himself or herself. And so he gets impatient, I'm not going to wait till December. So this person finds another investor, and they agree to exchange this note. So the promissory note goes this way, and the money goes the other way. So this is the secondary transaction. So again, this is what represents the beginning of the financial sector. And then you can easily imagine that first investor can sell to the second investor, and the second investor can sell to the third investor, and it goes on and on like this. So ultimately, there's a big circulation of paper from one hand to another hand. The money flows in the other direction. The pieces of paper flow in the other direction. So this is how market is generated. So we end up with a financial market. All financial transactions are kind of a variation on this simple model. So a promissory note is simple. You write up, I promise to pay such a so and so on such a such date. It's a very simple affair, 1919 sample, and then you can start to play up make it more complicated, more interesting. So a bond is a series of promissory notes just like that, and the bond will go for 10 years or even longer, but periodically they will also pay interest. So this is a bond which is an obligation of the United States of America. So very early, the sovereign states, starting with princes, they started to issue these kind of long-term bonds and raise money to, essentially fund their wars. So it's an alternative to actually taxing people, and people didn't want to tax, and this was much better way to raise money, and this is how it started. And then it spread. This is a Dutch East India Company, just as to show that, this is a historical document, 1622. Now things get more interested when it goes overseas, when it becomes international bond. So this is an international bond issued by the government of Egypt, actually the Khedive government, and this was meant to fund Suez Canal. So many things went wrong with Suez Canal, okay? And this was supposed to be an economic corridor. This was an earlier, just like our CPAC, this was supposed to be an economic corridor between East and West. And that was a very, it made a very persuasive argument that we're going to have ships going across the canal. Unfortunately, the deal was structured in a very bad way, and Khedive got into trouble. They could not pay that money. So what happened? Britishers sent their forces in there and basically took over the country. So this is when things go wrong, and this is a prime example of international default and the consequences of that default. Very early in the this is how things get more interesting. This is now a share certificate, a stock certificate. So rather than borrowing and pledging that we will pay you this much, say, you come in here and, we will share in the profit. And so what I wanted to illustrate here is this, that huge projects were completed by using bonds as well as stock money. Do you ever wonder how Punjab's canal system was funded? Do you wonder how Panama Canal was funded? This is Panama Railroad. Huge project, and I just explained to you the story about the Suez Canal. But huge projects need, billions of dollars. And how do you persuade people to actually put money in there? Okay, so the money tree, just like the tree of life, evolves, and it takes roots in the economy, and it becomes more interesting from money. You develop banks, and then the insurance. Insurance and finance are very close together. Actually, unfortunately, we view them as two separate fields, but they are like cojoint twins. So they separated quite early, but you can see that the tree of life is just like the tree of life. The money tree keeps on growing, the securities, derivatives, and so on and so forth, and the banks of different shapes and all. The point I want to make is this, that these financial institutions and products are embedded in the society. They are a product of the economic environment. They're a product of the political environment, and certain political and economic environment makes them grow, makes them flourish, and we can also reap much, many more benefits from them. So essentially, this is what's going on. The whole process is that on one side we have savers, people who have money to spare, and on the other side we have investors, people who are deficit, who are short of money, and they have demand for funds and the supply of funds, and the funds go this way and the securities go that way, and the financial markets help us to do that. you know. And in this whole setup, the financial institutions play a very central role. Financial institutions like banks, they are, you know, like any other manufacturing facility. A tomato ketchup factory, for example, will bring the fresh tomatoes from one side, mush them up, and then we'll have ketchup or tomato paste and other products. So similarly, the banks will take your deposits and then chop them up, slice them up, and dice them up, and then they will create different products, different kind of obligations, and they will place over there. So they are very important in the sense that they do what we call intermediation function. They are in between, but they are more than a broker, because by channeling the money from one side to the other side, they change the characteristics of the securities, the characteristics of the security. I mean, you go to the bank, what you got in return is a deposit slip, but that deposit slip is very different from what the bank does with the money. It creates bonds, CDs, and so on and so forth, so a lot of products. So it is there. So many other functions, like facilitating the payment system. You know, you write a check today in Islamabad, it gets cashed in Kuwait, and so on and so forth. So that's the magic happens. The other thing which the financial institution is to allow us to share risk. So risk is our, you know, we can't get rid of risk as such. This is how life is. But risk can be shared, or this sharing takes place due to pooling of the resources. So we say we can mitigate risk by spreading them out. I mean, clearly speaking, if we talk about $1 billion, there could be one investor of $1 billion, theoretically. But we can slice it. We can say, okay, I will take $1 million from 1,000 people, and that's one way of slicing it. And then you can say, well, I can take 1,000 rupees from 1 million people, and then $1,000 doesn't sound too bad. It's some kind of a risk I can afford to take. So that's how the pooling works. But also the magic happens because in large pools, risk becomes more tractable, because it becomes more predictable. We can actually mathematically figure out what would be the risk in a large pool much better than what the risk would be at an individual level. So in large pools, the investments starts to behave in a more decent, more predictable way, and that's how insurance companies do their business. So the thing is that life, after all, is a series of economic shocks, and what we can all be victim of those kind of shocks. But the problem is that at the societal level, anything that we do to mitigate the long-term risk has a side effect. There's a side effect because if I tell you, you know, you don't worry about your old age, I'm going to take care of you, right? So first thing we're going to do is to have a good life, you know, enjoy yourself, spend all your money because your old age is taken care of, right? So this is kind of a bad incentive that is created when we get into this. So many societies have tried to work at this, social security, pension systems, and so on and so forth, medical insurance, this is all part of this game. So the financial products, financial institutions are, they are supposed to make sure that the bad side of this doesn't get out of hand. Sometimes it does, you know, you devise a bad product and it does get out of control. So what is the nature of a financial product? After all, it's a piece of paper, but it's a piece of paper on which you have a lot of legal fine print, and delineating the rights and obligations of all the parties. So it's basically a legal instrument, and so a lot of legality is involved. But this means that it's as good as the legal system. If I say, I promise to pay you $1,000 1 year from today, who's going to collect that? Is this collectible? Is some judge or some court is going to rule in my favor, and how I'm going to actually collect it? So enforceability of this whole thing depends upon the law and the regulation. So the financial products are only as good as the regulatory and the legal environment. If you live in a country where nobody obeys the law, then you can't really have a functional financial system. Secondly, the credit worthiness. Who is actually signing this paper? Is this person, this guy, credible or not? Is he going to come up or fulfill his or her promise or not? So credibility becomes very important. And then, because we are looking into the future, we need to have a view of where the future is headed. What are our expectations? And then, very interestingly, it's not all economics, it's the psychology which drives much of the investor behavior. All of a sudden we can say, the world is collapsing, I don't trust tomorrow, maybe we'll have tomorrow or not have tomorrow, so I don't want to give any money to any person, I want to keep my money to myself. So this kind of expectations or investor psychology that we may call, or sentiment, that becomes very critical. So the interesting point is that much of this is in the public domain. So finance is born out of public domain, and it should remain indebted to the public domain and the public sector. So there's nothing such as free market or neoliberalism you can claim, because no matter what, even businesses, they depend upon the roads, the public roads, and the electricity, and the power supply, and the security, and so on and so forth. Exactly the same way, the financial products are very much related to this. So just a note on the inventions. And inventions are very interesting because they take a long time to mature and become commercialized. So here's an example of this. Now we don't even think about that. Everybody's, rolling these carry-ons, and even large suitcases have wheels. So can you imagine, there was a time there was no wheels. There were no wheels on the, I'm old enough to know that there were no wheels on the suitcases, but now nobody cares. But the interesting thing is that it took 19 years for a simple thing, for like a wheeled suitcase, to actually become a commercial success. All right? So the thing is that now we can see a wheeled suitcase, and I can copy it overnight. I can give it to somebody. People are very smart, and they can copy that. So inventions, once they take place, they are in open secret. They can easily copied. But anyway, now this other story is also interesting. This is about Incas. And Incas, they did have toys with wheels on. But very interestingly, that they did not have any vehicle which had wheels. No chariots, no tangas, no carts, and so on and so forth. So very interesting, because of their particular geography, because of their particular topography, they didn't get to use wheels on carts. So the point is that whatever invention is there, ideas comes, and ideas are brilliant, but whether they are adopted or whether they take roots, that's something different. It all depends upon the environment, what is needed. Now, so this is where Marx comes in, okay? So we know all about dialect. The financial products change over time, so we can call them, there are financial innovations, and these financial innovations are in response to the changing economic and technical environment, right? So we have seen some of these financial products in a very recent years, like Bitcoin and like pay by phone, what do you call it? You can use your cell phone to make a payment and so on and so forth. So these are all innovations. So they are being created. It's something similar to an evolutionary process. So there are trials and errors, there are mutations, and out of those mutations, some successful mutations are carried on, and some just die off. And those mutations which are successful, they have long life and they sustain. But as soon as the economic conditions changes, as soon as new technology evolves, then you got to think of something different. Now, with the financial revolution, with the financial innovations, there's a co-evolution of the regulation as well. Then this is some kind of a cat and mouse game being played, because people are clever, they are entrepreneurial. They would say, okay, the church is forbidding us to charge usury, so let's try to bypass that. So they will come up with a new idea and a new product. And then in response, the regulatory system comes as a reaction, as a response, and they have some they will evolve as well. So financial industry is actually the most regulated industry in any country. There are regulations as to make sure that the market confidence does not disappear, that if people stop, it's all about trust. The money is basically about trust. If there's $1 or 100 rupee, I trust that this would buy me something. So that's why I accept that. So financial stability, regulation about the financial stability, and consumer protection. Regulations are there to protect the consumer from discrimination, from unfair practices, from scams and frauds and so on and so forth. And finally, to reduce financial crime, as well as to make sure that the foreigners don't mess up with our system and they don't play funny with our system. So this kind of a cat and mouse game goes on all the time. Unfortunately, the people who are inventing these new things, they tend to be more clever, they tend to be more nimble, and it's just Tom and Jerry going on. So Jerry is faster, and the cat is trying to chase it, but the regulators are slower, they are slow to respond. So there are always people taking advantage of this whole game. Okay, so now finance is thought as a technology and a tool. On the left side, we have all kinds of people, the entities, individuals, businesses, multinational, non-profits, local governments, charities, countries, even international bodies. And they can use the financial products, which are, all kinds of financial products, to pursue any of these goals. So it depends on what you want to do. You want to create a hospital, you want to clean up the environment, you want to educate the masses. For all this, you need massive resources. So here we have the link. So the important thing is for the country, for the society, for the economy to make sure what goals they want to pursue, and if there is conflict between the two goals, do you want to have full employment, or do you want to have some people get rich Do you want to? You don't mind people getting rich? You don't mind inequalities? You have different set of goals. So the responsibility is with the society, with the economy, to keep their direction straight and determine what their goals should be. So look at the Muslims, how they are faring in this whole business. So in this case, I have these development indices are produced by an agency of the World Bank Group, and they are produced over time. But what I am showing you here is the Muslim are in blue and non-Muslims are in the red, and this is Financial Development Overall Index, and this is institutions and markets. So you see a huge difference between where advanced markets are and where Muslim majority countries are, and this difference persists if you compare just the emerging markets and lower income countries. So and this is very consistent, and that just shows that we don't like finance very much somehow. Again, this is an index of financial inclusion, and one criteria is how many people have bank accounts. So in this case, for low income countries, almost 71% of the population does not have income account. This is more or less the situation in Pakistan as well, that in account holding is hardly for 21% of the population. And you can compare it across different income groups. High income, interestingly, high income, even in high income countries, the gap is there and it's much larger, 4.5 versus 21%. Similarly, so the second graph over there, reasons for not having an account, religious reasons. Okay, people are asked, why don't you have an account? So they will say, I know, because my religion tells me not to have an account. So these are very telling. 12.8% in the low income countries, Muslim population is 12.8% saying, I don't want to have an account because of the religion, versus 6.4. So very stark difference. And then another index, financial literacy, how many people know something about finance, basics and this. And all here as well, you will see Muslims not faring very well. The interesting thing is that in the high income countries, the gap is even larger. So that is something to think about.
Why?
I don't know. That's a long discussion, but I would say that people, it's about identity, and I know a number of people who would not take a bank loan to borrow against their home, or not take a mortgage, not have insurance, not take a loan to buy a car, and so on and so forth. And this becomes in the high income countries, I think they have resources where they can use their own money to buy a car, for example. So people will buy a fully paid home, all cash. But in lower income countries, there's a compulsion to engage. That could be one reason. I think this is worth exploring further. So the question is, why should I care about finance? We should care about finance on two levels. One is the personal level. I need to make my budget. I need to live within my means. I need to manage my money. When I borrow, I need to be a responsible borrower. When I get a credit card, I don't want to just go and on a shopping spree and just overindulge myself. So it is good for building your own wealth. You got to know the basics of finance because there are so many sleazy people around, so many scamsters that you need to know where you are being hit from. Or building wealth, secure your futures, build a life nest, have something to for your old age, pension plans, and so on and so forth, and reduce your uncertainties down the road. That is at the personal level, but as a citizen, it's all even more important to know about finance, understand it, because your government may be doing a number on you, and you don't know why the government budget is not being balanced. You got to know what are what are the financial issues in budget, in policy making, in execution of different projects. So that's important. So you got to understand this, vote with your money, then participate in a democratic way, and more importantly, you participate democratically, you can set the goals for your society. You can say, all right, my priority is universal education. My priority is that I don't want to have a polluted country. So if you can do that, that's great. But in order to do that, you need to understand what is the financial game being played. So discontent, the sort of criticism we typically have, people say it's messy, there are a lot of scam, people are cheating all the time, it's inhuman, people are paying too much attention to money, not to human sentiments and human relations. There are people involved in hypocrisy and manipulation and so on and so forth. Then there is a criticism because of financial crisis, and it leads very periodically. It leads to economic instability, and the whole system's soundness is jeopardized. And it has to do with taking too much debt. So debt leverage means taking too much debt, basically. Use some of your own money, but mostly it's borrowed money. So debt is a big item here. At the personal level, people have a lot of issues with that, with their stories that people borrowed from the bank and got into big trouble. Their home was gone, their cars were gone, their lives were ruined, and so on and so forth. And the similar is the case with countries, with societies as such. And we are going through some of that right now. So that is other thing. And then financial products, financial markets are prone to generate bubbles. Bubbles mean that the reality is something different. The price should be $100, but the market somehow thinks that this is $500 or this is so there's a disconnect between the fair value and the market value, and that is a recurrent characteristic of the market. And we have seen this going on. And on the opposite side, the reverse side of bubble are crashes, where for no reason the market will crash. And that when it crashes, it takes the whole society down with it. And if you recall, we had a huge global financial crisis, 2008, 2009, and it originated in the US. It originated in the home market, mortgage market in the United States, but it destroyed so many lives all around the globe. So that is a criticism frequently encountered. Income inequalities, that this whole financial system is a tool, but what the end result is that the rich people, the wealthy people are able to take a greater advantage of that, use it to their advantage, and that pushes more and more people down the poverty line. And lastly, financialization and financial capitalism. So this is also an ongoing debate. Financialization means that in an economy, your economic activity becomes dominated by the financial sector, rather than you building factories, working hard, you're spending time trading shares or speculating on on Bitcoin and so on and so forth. So that's an ongoing debate. Actually, the word financialization originated much earlier, almost 100 years ago, and this was from the left that this term was used. Financial capitalism is more or less the same thing, but basically means that now we are dealing with something larger than the classical capitalism. The classical capitalism was about the real assets. Who owns the means of production, and how do we control those means of production? But now, when the finance becomes the dominant sector, you can control firms indirectly through your financial holdings, so financial ownership, and that is a problem. So where are we? So this is a statue showing Alexander the Great. And the story is this, that when he was young man, his father bought this horse and nobody could ride this horse. And Alexander went there and he figured out that the horse was afraid of its shadow. The horse was afraid of the shadow, so it was not, behaving, well. So he just basically turned it around, and as soon as the horse could not see its shadow, then he mounted the horse, and then from onward, this horse was with Alexander for a long, long time. So our financial sector, financial finance system or finance field, I think it's more like a wild horse, but we need to figure out how to tame it somehow. And for that, what we can do is to first of all set good goals for the society. What do we want to do? There is a ongoing, this not only with Pakistan, I'm not talking about Pakistan here, but across the globe, there's a feeling that military might, the military power leads to economic power, and that needs to be dispelled. And what we need to do is to concentrate on the real source of power, which is our economy, and a big part of that economy is the strength of the financial sector. Environmental sustainability, that's a very real issue. And most importantly, we need to have finance so that we can encourage innovation, we can encourage entrepreneurship. And here are some of the ideas people throw out. First of all, we need to understand what this is. So we need to have emphasis on financial literacy, which means we should be able to figure out, starting from our own budget, we should be able to balance our own budget and keep it in limits, to actually understanding the global financial system. So we need to have at a greater level. Financial inclusion means that let's make it work for everybody. So include more people. It is not a game the wealthy people play, but it is a game everybody can participate and to her and her advantage. One thing is to, for example, if you have pension systems which are available to all, to greater segments of the people, you have medical insurance systems available to all people, you bring people in, and then they they are beneficiaries of the financial sector as well. expand the role of philanthropy. Charity is ignored, and there are ways to encourage charity. For example, many cases, people have problems in their life. Their house is lost, they are sick, have medical bills, and so on and so forth. In that case, that is not the answer in that case. The answer is that we need to expand and make charity and philanthropy more play a greater role. And lastly, democratization of finance means dispersal of capital rather than capital being concentrated into few families or few hands. We need to somehow include people and make them more inclusive. One easy way or one practical way is to expand home ownership, and that's the sure way to build wealth. If you have people who can afford their homes, that's a first asset that you can create, and then that creates more more opportunities. So anyway, what do you think? So I will stop here, and I look forward to your comments and some interesting discussion.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jamshed, for such a easily digestible overview of the financial sector. This is something that we don't see too often, so much appreciated in that sense. For those of you who are familiar with me, my own sort of background comes from a sort of political economy background, but I also come from a troublemaker background, so I will start on a bit of a provocative note. You did mention that we have to tame this beast, right? But if you look globally, one of the key sort of players, stakeholders within the lobbying sort of that goes on in the lead up to election campaigns and so on is the financial sector, right? So they do have a very direct role in the democratic process and getting people who they prefer into Congress and into passing policies that are in line with their interests, economic interests, political interests, and so on. How can we tame this beast if that is sort of occurring simultaneously? Players from the financial sector, big banks,
Play an outsized role, and they are the largest contributor to the political campaigns. So they get their way in so many different ways. But relatively speaking, when people are in a democratic setup and they have a say, when there's a freedom of speech, there's a freedom they can express their opinion, it's much harder for banks to form these kind of oligopolies and form these cartels and take advantage of that. There's always a back and forth. This is not one way that we are moving, but the pendulum swings one way or the other. Sometimes, for example, during the last swing, many banks got away with tightening the bankruptcy rules. Bankruptcy laws were tightened against the individuals in favor of the banks. And that was so. Similarly, the banks got away with saying that we're not going to provide you with paper statements, for example. It saved them a lot of money. Small things like this. But there is, again, there is a fair amount of competition. But we should look at our own country. I think in our own country, we are far from having those citizen rights, so we can have a say in where the financial sector should be heading, or even examining the role of these financial system. So in our case, the banks have huge margins. The difference between their interest margin, the interest revenue, and the interest expense, the interest margin, that's a very fat margin, and that has been so for a long time. So the question is why that is so, and these days they don't seem to be really concerned about bringing more customers in or having expanding their accounts. So, I mean, that's the case. So it's a back and forth. It's a constant struggle, I think.
Thank you for that. Just sort of moving to a broader level, I did mention that the way you explained the ideas in today's presentation, not really something that we see very often. And this is a problem like within my own sort of discipline as well, the discipline of economics. When economists are talking about various ideas and so on, they'll talk about these in a way that is very inaccessible to the layperson. There almost seems to be this sort of, it's like an alien leviathan that nobody can access, and almost kind of functioning as a gatekeeping mechanism, insulating itself from the general public and so on. How can we address that problem where it becomes less of a sort of intimidating thing for most people?
See, I started being an economist. I can relate to that. But then I moved to the business field, and my area is business finance and corporate finance. In the business schools, you know, we are in the nuts and bolts business. So we talk about the practices, not only the theory, but the policies and the practices. So by nature or by construction, business students, they are a little bit more in touch with the ground. Economics has become such a large field. It's a mother science now, and there are so many specializations. So definitely there are some of these subfields which are more theoretical, which are more in the cloud, but then there is a lot going on. For example, there's a lot of behavioral finance research, and there's neuroeconomics, and what you may have it. There's a lot of research in institutional economics, in narrative economics. These are the cutting edge fields, and they tend to be more attuned with how people actually behave. So first thing of economics, first task of economics is to try to understand how people actually behave. And once we have a good idea how they behave, then we can have some policy measures attached to that. So I think sometimes this is unfortunate because people have become so specialized, the fields are so narrowed that you don't know what your right hand is doing, and the person, your friend on the left side, what is that we're doing. So I think there needs to be more interdisciplinary studies and policy-oriented research as well.
Just to follow up on that, do you think there's a role for the education system? I mean, I went through the entirety of my education without really getting access to sort of, you know, formal instruction on what products I can look into from an investment point of view, or even generally and so on. What is the responsibility of banks, for instance? I had a friend who worked at a bank for a while. One of the things that he told me was that banks are paying their clerical staff such low rates that they generally tend to attract very incompetent people, and these are the people that are directly engaging with the customers, and so these clerks aren't able to communicate their ideas, their products, the terms and conditions, and so on. What is the responsibility of the banks and the education system?
In the US, there's a huge emphasis on financial literacy, and that is introduced at the school level, while kids are, taught to, how to, for example, use their credit card responsibly, how not to get their parents into trouble, and so on and so forth. But also, the basic mechanism, how to balance their books and stuff like that. So it is a lot of emphasis. And then at the practical level as well, as the level of financial advisor, wealth managers, and so on and so forth. So there's a movement going on where financial advice is to be regarded as a public good. We should have free access to financial advice. So rather than you having to pay to discuss your financial situation, you can sit with somebody and talk it over and get good advice. What's happening today is that there are financial advisors, but most often they are compromised because they are receiving some of the compensation from insurance companies, from other financial outfits, from mutual funds. So they are sometimes not very upfront, and they want to steer you in the direction where they are going to get the largest fees or commissions and so on and so forth. So that's an abuse of the system. So there is a movement that these financial advice should be treated as any kind of education, and especially for poor. Wealthy people can take care of themselves. They can afford to hire an advisor or pay an advisor, but particularly for the poor, people you go first day in the job and then they ask you, where do you want to invest your retirement contributions? And the employees are typically confused, very confused. So at that point, there should be somebody who can guide them correctly. So there's a lot of gap here.
For sure. No, yeah, I agree. In terms of just bringing the discussion into Pakistan, what are some of the tools that are available, for instance, to the young people, recent graduates who are just starting off working and so on? I'm sure a lot of the audience today does constitute that demographic. If they're interested in investing, what are the options available to them in terms of stocks or bonds, mutual funds, and so on? How can they begin to access that space?
I am not very familiar with that practical aspect. I spend only a short period here, but the Pakistan financial sector has been there has been a lot of financial repression. That's the term we use. That it has not flourished as much as it should have. For that, the responsibility is with the financial institution as well as with the federal government, because the federal government is sucking money out of the banking system and using much of that for their own deficit financing. So for that, what we need to do, with the result that there is, that the banks have become lazy. They are not really, they are not interested in expanding their services. The other thing is that inflation is a killer. The basic killer of finance is inflation. If the inflation is running at 20-30%, finance doesn't flourish at all. So financial monetary stability is a prerequisite. So for that reason, we should have house financing available more than it is. We should have student loans. We should have pension funds and so on and so forth. But this is only possible in a stable economic environment. It's very simple, if in times of inflation, the debtor wins and the creditor loses. The person who's making a loan is going to lose, and the person who's taking the loan makes money because you borrow when the money was worth more and you pay back when the money is far less. So in an inflationary environment, nothing's. The other killer of finance are the legal environments. Enforceability of the contracts, the sanctity of the contract, the rule of law, that is a must. As I showed you, the financial product is a product of the legal environment. And if the legal environment is so weak, then there's nothing. So I don't know what to tell people, but I think it's the it's the responsibility of the government to make sure that the macroeconomic environment is conducive.
It kind of reminds me of when the privatization wave of the financial sector happened. This was in the 80s, I believe. A lot of the promises that were made during that time when that initiative was just kicking off, inclusion in the financial system, more people are going to open bank accounts, investment rates are going to go up, we're going to move towards digitalization of the space, efficiency, and so on and so forth. But if we look at the statistics today, the top 5 banks, I believe, own 60% of the deposits and are making 80% of the profits. Loans are being granted not to SMEs or individual entrepreneurs, even marginalized communities. They're more towards government bonds, which are risk-free in their nature. How can we begin to address these kinds of problems? Are these because of regulations or because of our banks not being able to innovate? What are the constraints there?
You see, the innovation side and the knowledge side, is very simple these days, because other people have done this kind of experiment. I just showed you. Once you see a product, I mean, it took maybe 30 years to actually have a car, which was actually, commercial, was a commercial success. Germans were ahead of it, but then Ford Motor and Ford Motor basically dominated the field, but it took a long time. But now, when you look at a car, all you have to do is to reverse engineer, and you have this thing. So you see, the things have made so easy for you that development is no-brainer now. All you have to do is to copycat, and that's how many countries got ahead, because they were low-hanging fruits, and all you do. So similarly with finance, it's just copying and pasting. It's a legal thing. So you see the legal, how the legal framework is done. The problem is the enforceability, and it also it's also the culture of people, acceptability of people becomes very important. For example, life insurance, the idea was very simple. It was very simple that pool money, whoever is the deceased, you pay the family so much amount. So very simple, all right. But it took so long for people to actually appreciate its usefulness, and people tried so many ways to sell insurance. Selling insurance was very, very hard, because you could never tell the widow or would-be the widow that, if your husband die, we'll give you this much money. So this was not how you sold insurance. So people found different. So the concepts are very simple. They're very importable. All you have to do is copy paste. But the problem is that we need to have the legal grounding, the rule of law, the enforceability of contract, and so on and so forth, and then educate people that these opportunities are available.
You mentioned cultural constraints. You also had a few points on that in your presentation. I want to talk about this religious aversion to interest and so on. If we look at the situation from a purely theological point of view, let's say, is there any merit to this aversion? Because even in the contemporary age, you buy a product from any sort of store, there was probably some interest involved in its value chain and so on. So when hyper-conservative individuals will talk about these ideas, I don't think they're aware that even the clothes that they're wearing might have sort of been a product of that very same process.
Right.
What are your thoughts on that, and how can we begin to curtail this problem?
Yeah, that may need another long session, but in short, it is very real. I have people come to me, people teaching finance, for example, and they say, sometimes we are stopped by students and they tell us, why are you teaching this haram thing? This is all haram, why are you teaching it? And then, what do you do about that? But this is very real, because it's very clearly stated in the Quran, and the hadiths are very clear. So how do we reconcile this thing? So many people have tried to reconcile. On the one side, we see huge benefits from coming from the financial products, but then there is something which is keeping us down. So one thing is to do some kind of a rational analysis and see under what circumstances these prohibitions were enforced, not only in our religion but in other religions as well. So in my own research, the two great things, two major differences were the institution of slavery and the institution of limited liabilities. So when these two things were, these institutions changed, we abolished slavery and we have limited liability now. That made a huge difference. So when you say riba or when you say a loan, it is defined, it is a social construct, and it is defined by the legal and economic institutions, operating at that time. So even any word, you say a home, for example. A home is not, in your mind, a home is different than what's in my mind. A tree, for example, is a different tree, So a tree today is not the same tree, 1400 years ago, 1500 years ago. So, the same thing. So when you say riba, it has to be seen through that lens.
Do you think the Islamic banking system is a good alternative? Just for the audience, could you explain how that is justified within the sort of religion and so on?
That's a difficult question for me. You see, I just explained to you one of the crudest way of going around usury was to pretend that you're selling something. So more of that is going on. So I appreciate I think there are very well-intentioned people behind Islamic economics and Islamic finance. These people are, in most cases, they're well-intended. They want something really good. So I'm not doubting that. But then there are some people who are doing this, as they say, by mirror and smoke and mirror,
It does seem that way.
So most of now people realize that, they're hiding. This is like, that coin thing, that there are three cups and the coin, so it's here and it's not there. So I would say that there are four categories of people. First category of people, this is my parable of the wheel, First category of people would say, we don't want this wheel, and in certain circumstances, the wheel is not practical to start with, all right? So that's one category of people. They say, we don't want a wheeled car, ऊंट पे चढ़ के हम जा सकते हैं इधर उधर. Then the second category of people are trying to reinvent the wheel. Because a lot of people, a lot of history, there's a huge tradition in history, and the Catholics have dealt with this, the Europe has dealt with this. Then the third category is that people are trying to fit a round wheel in a, square peg, right? So the fourth category is people who are painting the wheel green, giving it a nice Arabic name, and saying, here you have. Right. So, there's a lot of understanding that this is not what we intended, but the important thing is that we need to come to terms with this.
I think they phrase it as profit sharing. I think that's how it functions for them if you want to invest in something.
Profit and sharing accounts is sounds very good, but in implementation it is not very different. Right.
Okay.
So this is a sort of consensus of people who have looked at this.
My next question is sort of at a broader level, global level. It's on consumer credit, credit cards, and so on. I believe it was the early 70s when we began to see real wages stagnate. And that is also around when consumer credit became more and more ubiquitous and more people started to seek out credit cards and so on. What this functioned to do was allow corporations a free hand in just not raising their employees' wages, keeping them at the same level, and just this credit card consumer loan business became a kind of crutch to address that sort of gap that between their wages and the inflation rates at that time. What are your thoughts about that?
Are you talking about Pakistan or
Globally.
Globally is, I would say, there's a lot of variation, But generally speaking, I would say that, in order to keep the basic driver is the technology and new innovations. We're moving from, now we are in fourth industrial revolution, and things are becoming, become more uncomfortable with the workers. So somehow the workers lag behind in upgrading their skills, and so there, I think the responsibility lies with the public sector to make sure that where the things are moving, forecast that and plan for that in terms of building new skills. I mean, in Pakistan, for example, we once, when I was studying economics, we were very proud that it's a labor surplus country. We thought it was an advantage to have low-cost labor. But these things, labor cost means so much different now. And it's the productivity which really makes a difference. And with the new machines, the automated machines, the large-scale integration of computers into the production processes, it's not the job of an illiterate labor anymore. Even small things like, your clothing industry, this is now done heavily computerized, cutting, stitching. There's so automated automation going on that this is how it is going. So maybe Uncle Marx was correct in that.
There's this great website for those of you who are interested in this. It's called WTF Happened in 1971. And it's basically a series of graphs that you can look at on various economic indicators. There's one particular graph which outlines productivity and wages. So you can see from 1971 onwards, productivity continues to rise, whereas wages are stagnating during that same period up until today. So is it really a productivity issue, or is it more complex than that?
I don't know. I left economics a long time ago. So basically, it's an economics question. So you may be able to shed a better light on that.
I think in the interest of time, we'll just take a few questions from the audience. Anyone have a question?
Thank you for this having a great session. Basically, I have a question that we have now like two big models of financial and corporate sectors, Islamic finance and capitalism. And Islamic finance is lacking a lot in this innovation. So there are a lot of models has been and tools has been used nowadays in banks. So how much do you think these models, Islamic models, can be sustainable for future progress?
Okay, sorry, I thought you were going to. Okay.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you for such a nice explanation. Sir, I am talking in terms of Pakistan, the irregularities and the inefficiency of financial sector at times. And there is this concept of e-governance around the world, and quite few countries are switching to it. the financial sector, can it switch to e-governance? How much safe is it? And in terms of Pakistan, will the accountability become more efficient, or it will be the other way around? Will it make irregularities more common? Do you think Pakistan, the Ministry of Finance and the Interior Ministries and the governance system, the finance, can it be switched to e-governance?
Okay, let me come to that later about this Islamic finance and where it is going. I think we should let the market decide, which is a better system. If you say we're going to prohibit interest altogether, right? So that is not really a fair competition. So if they are coming up with a really innovative products which people can use for their benefit, let there be competition and let people decide. People will vote by their dollars, by spending their money or depositing their rupee. But I think it will not be productive to prohibit one kind of a system in favor of another system. So the taste of the pudding is in its eating, and it has been like 50 years already that we have had this experiment with Islamic economics. If you want to continue with that for another 50 years, that's fine. But when you say, it's not like, whether you have Coca-Cola or whether you have Pepsi, it's not a comparison, because what you're saying is that other system is, or conventional or European, or the Western system is haram. So you are not only saying we are better or we are providing a better product, but you are saying the other guy is illegitimate. So that creates an aversion. That doesn't create a fair playing field. It creates an aversion in the minds of the ordinary people against the conventional finance. So let them prove what they are saying, and I think if they come up with really innovative product, and everybody will be more than happy to adopt that. But things have not moved as much as it was predictive to do. Even today, the total Islamic assets are about $3 trillion. That's a lot of money, but compared to the total, financial assets, it's a very, very minuscule amount. And half of that is Iran and half and Saudi Arabia. So if you just take out these two countries, you won't even have a $1 trillion. So anyway, this is how we should take it. The other question was e-governance and e-commerce. I think that's already there. It is well established. Nobody goes to the bank anymore. I mean, I haven't been inside a bank for a long time, and I do all my transactions, financial transactions from home, from my cell phone, wherever you want to that. So that's technology is pushing us there. So there's no going back. In terms of the security, I think they have gotten a good grip on that. I think most of the financial transactions are pretty secure. I have had a couple of incidences where people have hacked into my account, stolen my money, but I think it turned out to be okay because they took care of this. But I think similarly, if you talk about e-governance, about the government spending, let's say about government financial dealings and all this thing, I think that's a good step if they can make it more visible, more transparent, and more they can have more explanation of why, for example, they want to tax the solar panels, for example, make it more transparent, take public opinion, and then do some expert thinking as well and move with that. I think that's all good.
Let's take one final question from Moin Batle Saab.
Bartlett sir.
Thank you so much for a great talk. So it was fascinating what you shared about how the company's structure started. And so I'm just thinking about in Pakistan today, you look at our stock exchange. We have very few IPOs. A number of companies are they are buying out their own shares and going private. Companies complain about too much regulation. So it looks like companies are not really raising the capital from the stock market. So have we gone too far? And seems like it's defeating the purpose the way it is in Pakistan.
No, you're absolutely right. Stock market is not playing the role it should be playing. There is huge trading, but the trading is concentrated in maybe half a dozen stocks. The rest of the market is dead, especially textile sector, for example. Not much movement going on. We do have corporations, but many of these corporations were formed because it's sort of fashionable. Because the government said, you got to incorporate and list your stocks, but they remain family controlled and, closely held firms. So there's not much float in the market. But the stock market is, flourishes within the economy. So if the economy was doing much better, there would be a different story. We don't see new company formations. Most of these formations are small and not worth, listing on the stock exchange. So there's not much initial public offering or IPOs going on. So the basic role of the stock market, moving capital from the savers to the industry, the primary function is not really effectively being done. So what we see is a lot of, churning which is going on, a lot of transactions of secondary nature. One person buys, the other person sells, and so on and so forth. So this is, I think, reflection of our economy as well as our overall legal environment.
So thank you so much, Dr. Jamshed. This has been a very insightful conversation. I mean, I personally have learned quite a great deal from this, and I'd like to thank the Black Hole for hosting it, and to all of you for your questions and attendance. Thank you so much. Until next time.
Thank you very much.